Hey y'all, and welcome back to another episode of Becoming Known. I'm your host, Big Taj, and today we're going to go over Stanza 6. So Stanza 6 talks about the succeeding stages in the formation of a world, which brings evolution of the world down to its fourth grade period, which is where we are present day. Now, these next two stanzas are very, very long. They're about 35 pages apiece. So instead of reading every single part, I am going to just go through and paraphrase what you need to know from each point so that we are not spending 3 episodes talking about one stanza. If you do want to read the stanza yourself, The Secret Doctrine is available on forgottenbooks.org. It's also available on scribd.com as well. Scribd you do have to pay for, but forgottenbooks.org you do not. So you can go and you can download this and read the book yourself. But I just didn't want to bore people with reading all of that information, 35 pages worth of information, and then giving, my 2 cents about it. We are about 15 weeks, which is usually what it takes for the first season. So we are about that 15-week mark. So next episode will be the last episode of season 2, and then we'll get a summer break and come back in August. During that interim, I will be working on a new YouTube series where I basically help us understand some very high-level complex ideas when it comes to philosophy, religion, theosophy. And I kind of want to start from the beginning of what the questions that we ask ourselves when we're on our spiritual journey and we're going on this journey of self-discovery, what we're trying to figure out. And I want to answer some of those questions for you guys. So if you are not following me yet on YouTube, please go subscribe to my channel. It's Big Taj with 2 J's. And on May 8th, which is going to be the new moon, I'm going to be starting this project, starting the editing portion of this project. And on May 16th, which is my new year, my birthday, I will be launching the very first episode. So please go tap in because I'm going to be dropping at least like 3 to 4 episodes a week. I will have an editor, so I do have a team behind me. I'm really, really excited about this new project because I've been wanting to put something together for this for a long time. I just felt like I was missing pieces. And during this, 15-week period of me doing this season, I've been doing a lot of research, a lot of studying, and I think that I have a better understanding of a lot of the complex ideas that I've gone over before. So what I'm basically doing with this new YouTube series is taking y'all along this journey of self-discovery and then really teaching y'all what the allegories are about when it comes to the Bible and certain religions, certain ancient gods and stuff like that, because I think that type of thing will actually help us to understand what the Bible is actually saying, because the Bible used to actually consider not only the greatest book of magic, but it also was a guide to ascension. And the allegories were meant to help people ascend to higher levels of consciousness, right? But with the rise of Christianity, it was weaponized. So it's like people who are wise, who can see through the veil, will be able to read the Bible from a different perspective than people who are basically ignorant to the knowledge that it's presenting. So for me, I'm just going to be clearing that stuff up for a lot of us, because I know there's a lot of people who are struggling with religion right now, and also just connecting the dots, because there's a lot of cycles and repeated patterns, and it's a lot of stuff that we can learn from ancient wisdom. So I really do think that I'm the perfect person for it, and I want to be a resource to our community. So again, tap in with me on YouTube. The difference between the YouTube series and my podcast is that I'll have visuals. Again, I have an editor who's going to help me when it comes to labels, when it comes to subtitles. It is going to be a lot different because I'll be able to teach in a format that appeals to everybody's learning style, just in case y'all had questions about that. So we're going to go ahead and jump into Stanza 6, Part 1, which says, by the power of the Mother of Mercy and Knowledge, Kuan Yin, the triple of Kuan Sha Yin, which is just basically the Father, the Mother, and the Holy Spirit, residing in Kuan Yin 10, Fohat, the breath of their progeny, the son of the sons, having called forth from the lower abyss or chaos, the elusive form of Shan Chan, our universe, in the 7 elements. So what is this stanza trying to tell us? First, we need to understand the definition. So Kuan Shin Yin is the 7th. It's considered to be the male principle, but it also is considered to be the combination of the Mother, the Father, and the Holy Spirit. And Kuan Yin is the feminine principle, or the 6th principle. Okay, this is what we consider to be the divine soul, or the vehicle for the spirit. Now, they are the 2 aspects in the macrocosm mesocosm, and microcosm. So we're talking about the cosmos, we're talking about nature, and we're talking about man. Now, divine wisdom and intelligence is what they bring to the table, okay? So this section is trying to explain the hierarchy between the two aspects. Many people say different things, but the common consensus is that everything is manifested from the female aspect. For example, the subconscious mind or the right brain, which is associated with imagination and manifestation, is the feminine aspect. The male aspect, or the conscious mind, gives the directions to the feminine aspect. And once the feminine aspect accepts those directions, it manifests the effects or the products of whatever it was, whatever the directions it received. This is why the mother is considered to be the root of nature, because it's the only aspect that can actually create or manifest anything, okay? At the end of this part of the stanza, it does say electricity is life, and electricity has to do with alkalinity. So if you want to become more electric or more alive, you have to become more alkaline, okay? So eating alkaline foods and drinking alkaline water. Those are just quick tips. But another quick tip, just side note, if you mix spring water and key limes, it makes natural alkaline water, while if you mix purified water and baking soda, it makes artificial alkaline water. So write that down. In the first part of this stanza, you just need to understand that faux hot is the electricity which gives life, right? Because it sets everything into motion. The faux hot emanates with the masculine principle. However, the feminine principle is the only principle that can actually create or manifest something into the material world, or manifest anything in the material universe. Now, Kuan Yin 10 is the material that makes the feminine principle. So it is described as the heaven of sound. So where sound comes from to make manifest of the divine voice, which we already discussed, the feminine principle is responsible for the manifested product of the will. So your voice is the manifestation of your thoughts. It's expressed thought. So feminine principle is the magical frequency of sound in aether in nature. So aether is what connects us all and records what is, what was, and what will ever be, also known as akasa. It's in everything, right? Just like electricity is in everything, this aether is in everything as well. But this divine voice calls forth the universe to form or manifest out of chaos or water, and the seven elements, which are the seven main planets in our planetary system. The next part of this stanza goes on to talk about Vash, which is basically a deity that's related to speech. So Vash is supposed to represent this feminine principle. So it's a couple things that I'll divine first, and then I'll kind of wrap up what this first part of this stanza is talking about, okay? So first we need to know what Paranava is, which in Sanskrit, it just means spoken out loudly. So there are 4 types of speech or language. A specific type of speech that has to do with speech that's spoken out loud is called Vaikirvash. And basically, para is subjective and latent light and sound, which exist with all or the unknown. When it is transferred to the latent light or the ideation of the logos, it becomes Pasyanti, and when it becomes express light, it is Madhyama. So this is just explaining the path of speech from unrecognized latent light into ideation, which is basically just intelligence. Then it is express speech, okay? So it's like the path that speech follows. All creation starts with this feminine principle, and Vash is the female logos, co-creator and the mother of the gods. So this is really telling us everything comes from light, sound, and aether. The light is the masculine principle, which directs the wheel, but the sound and the aether are the feminine principles from what this is basically saying, what this stanza says. So the first part of this stanza is talking about how the feminine aspect comes into play and starts creating and forming the world via sound and aether. The last stanza talked about the fohat, which is the electrifying principle bringing everything to life. But this stanza is talking about how now that the light has been emanated, which is directing the will of the universe towards the feminine principle, it initiates the creation or manifestation process done by the feminine principle using sound, light, and aether, along with the 7 elements and moving them into form. Now, the second part of this stanza says, the swift and the radiant one produces the 7 Layu centers, against which none will prevail till the great day be with us, and seats the universe on these eternal foundations surrounding San Chan with the elementary germ. What you need to know from this is that San Chan just means universe, And when they talk about this Leia, it's basically a state where no differentiation has happened, okay? Also called 0 point or 0 point energy by scientists. And in this state, things come into balance and appear to be at rest. So the Sanskrit meaning of Leia is like extinction, dissolution, or rest. And it is a neutral axis where all differentiation starts. So it's the limiting point of all of our senses. So imagine that toroidal field that we talked about in the first episode, right? We have a spiritual energy or fire rotating clockwise at the top, right? And then we have a material or water energy rotating counterclockwise at the bottom, right? So it looks like a figure 8 sitting on top of each other. And then we talked about how the heart space is the plane of inertia, or Earth is on the plane of inertia. Well, the plane of inertia is where that 0 point energy is, because it's where those two energies that are equal opposite of each other, meaning one is positive, one is negative, they're sitting on top of each other, and it's where they come into balance in the center. At the plane of inertia, these two energies or opposite energies are accelerating towards each other, and then they basically converge and balance each other out, okay? Now, the 7 centers of sound that they were talking about are the 7 planets or the archetypes, okay? So we're talking Mercury, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Saturn, the sun, and the moon, okay? I know the sun and the moon are not planets, but they're considered to be the sacred 7, okay? This Safi Wiki actually does a really good job of explaining this process. So basically it says when Fohat is said to produce 7 Leia centers, it means that the formative or creative purposes, the great law or God, stops or rather modifies its perpetual motion on 7 invisible points within the area of the manifested universe. The great breath digs through space 7 holes into the Leia to cause them to circumgyrate during manavantaric. So at this 0 point, there is this latent energy that activates when the Fohat emanates at the manavantarian dawn. Actually doing research on this new project that I'm working on, and I came across this guy named Santos Bonacci, right? And he was basically saying that each planet is considered to be an atom, right? Which makes sense because the Earth is an atom. We're atoms. There's atoms inside of our body. It's like everything is built into the likeness of whatever the archetype is, right? So we know that Earth has an electromagnetic field around it because we call it atmosphere, right? And we also have an electromagnetic field around us, which we can see, you know, when we look at our aura, right? So the sun is supposedly the center of the atom, and the planets are the electrons and photons circling the atom. And Earth happens to be that plane of inertia. So that would mean that the planets that are kind of circling the sun in our universe would be the chakras of the universe that we live in. It blew my fucking mind because you remember that episode where we're talking about the higher self and we're talking about the law of one, when we explained like the evolutionary process of how planets are formed and how planets decide the archetype of the beings that are going to live on the planet, and they're made in the likeness of the planet itself. So if everything is an atom, it would fucking make sense. On top of that, when we continue on through this stanza, and right when we get to the end, we'll start to understand that all these planets are actually connected to each other, and they all represent different densities of consciousness, because not only do we go through an evolutionary process on the microcosm, our planet goes through an evolutionary process on the mesocosm, and then our universe, which is the planetary chain, the sun and the planets that circle it, go through an evolutionary process too on the macrocosm. The second part of this stanza is actually explaining the evolutionary cycle of each planet and how it goes through the same densities of consciousness that we go through. And as we talked about before when we were on that episode about densities of consciousness, once you reach that 7th level of consciousness, the only way for you to continue to go up to that 8th level of consciousness, which is really the first density of the next universe, is for the universe itself or the planet itself to collapse back into itself, into this Leia or this 0 point energy. This collapse is also called the day of be with us because everything goes back into the all, right? And then after this period of rest or this day of be with us, the next time this latent energy is activated by the Fohat, it will come back at a higher density, okay? So the density will be 8 or 1 of that next universe, kind of like the scales on the piano. So the 8th note is the start of the next octave, right? And the 8th density here is actually the first density of that next universe. So that's what this second part is explaining. Now the third part of this stanza says, of the 7 elements, first 1 manifested, 6 concealed, 2 manifested, 5 concealed, 3 manifested, 4 concealed, 4 produced, 3 hidden, 4 and 1 fraction revealed, 2 and 1/2 concealed, 6 to be manifested, 1 laid aside. Lastly, 7 small wheels revolving, 1 giving birth to the other. So this part of the stanza is actually talking about the formation of the planets in our planetary chain that are all linked together, and how the evolutionary process of Earth is actually linked to the evolutionary process of all the other planets in our universe, okay? So there's this subtle current that connects the planets in our planetary chain, which allows life's elements to pass from world to world, okay? So this is why we are affected by the planets around us, because we are all connected. And understand there's an energy that's sending their elemental properties into our Earth's properties, okay? So back then, you have to understand they only knew about the 7 planets, or they only considered those 7 planets to be sacred. Even though all of the planets are connected, they are not all on the same plane of perception. That is why almost all the planets look translucent like the moon, because some are more evolved in more light body, where we are at the bottom of this plane and we're fully solid or physical. We're actually the only planet that's in the material or physical plane, okay? So the planets that are further away from us are not visible to the human eye because they are at higher levels of consciousness and not physical like we are. So each planet represents an archetype ruled by an element. Now, when it says from 1 manifested, 6 concealed, just like each planet, which is on the mesocosmic level, and human on the microcosmic, they all have to go through an evolutionary cycle. So the planetary chain itself has to go through an evolutionary cycle. And each planet is basically a reincarnation of the last planet at a higher level of consciousness. So the planets are the levels of consciousness, or the chakras for our universe. Each must reach the necessary balance or become more electric before the next one can come into our awareness, just like the chakras in our body. So if you're locked into the bottom 3 chakras, you're not aware of your heart space whatsoever. So when it says 1 manifested, 6 concealed, 2 manifested, 5 concealed, and so on and so forth, it's basically talking about how these 7 wheels, which are, chakras or planets, revolving like the wheels of the chakra, one giving birth to the other. That is what this means. They're all connected. And until you master the lower level planets or the lower level elements, you won't be able to be vibrating enough to have the consciousness to be aware of those higher level planets. That makes sense, okay? Because basically it's structured just how we're structured when we talked about the planes of existence, right? Where Earth is on the material plane, and then there's 2 planets that are on the astral plane, and then there are 2 more planets that are on the ethereal plane. And as they go higher up into these levels of consciousness or these planes of existence, right? And we know that in order to get to a higher plane of existence, we have to be able to raise our vibration, okay? So we have to have perception and awareness of those planes. The same thing with the planetary chain. That's why a lot of as the planets get farther away from us, the less solid they appear. Really, the only solid matter or the solid planets in our planetary chain are Earth and Saturn, which we know Saturn has a specific relationship to Earth. Saturn creates the veil of illusion. So before you come to this planet, you go through Saturn itself, and it creates this veil of illusion, right? And it veils you, puts you through this spell of forgottenness, basically, and you don't know who you are. And then you enter into the lap of Maya, or illusions, where you gain karma because you're going against natural laws that you're not even fucking aware of. So Saturn is very, very big when it comes to the elites, because Christianity, Judaism are Saturnian religions, right? But you can see Saturn everywhere. It's on the Pepsi can. It's on like literally everywhere in our environment, because Saturn is illusion. Better yet, Saturn is the reason for the illusion in our plane. And that's why the powers that be love Saturn. And that's why they're always throwing up satanic or Saturn signs, because they want to keep us locked in this very, very low vibration, or keep us locked into illusion. So again, basically what you need to understand here is that these wheels, or these chakras or planets of this universe, which are all connected, they need to flow from the lowest density to the highest density in consciousness in order to evolve as a system into new densities of consciousness, okay? And because we're all connected, what we do on Earth affects these other planets. All right, so part 3 is just explaining how these planets were manifested and are activated based on the evolutionary process of the planet that came before it, and that the fohat, which is electricity, the more electricity, again, the higher levels of consciousness we can ascend to, connects all these planets together and is also responsible for activating the planets when the appropriate level of consciousness or electricity has been reached. And the form of these planets are put into shape by the feminine principle, which is manifested sound or aether, but the light or fohat is what activates them initially, okay? Idea that space is quiet does not hold up, because the feminine principle is what holds things into form, and the feminine principle itself is aether, which we know is what connects us all, right? It records everything through a kasa, but it is also sound. Now, in this new series I have coming up, we're going to talk about sine waves and we're going to talk about magnetic frequency waves, because our whole universe is based off of that, and that is what we came to experience. So we need to understand frequencies, we need to understand sound, we need to understand light, and we also need to understand the aether around us. Basically, how to tap into that aether. Okay, now part 4 says he builds them in the likeness of older wheels or worlds, placing them on the imperishable centers. How does Fohat build them? He collects the fiery dust. He makes balls of fire, runs through them, and rounds them, infusing life thereinto, then sets them into motion. Some one, some the other way. They are cold. He makes them hot. They are dry. He makes them moist. They shine. He fans and cools them. Thus acts Fohat from one twilight to the other during 7 eternities. So this is basically letting us know that Fohat doesn't rest during that 7 eternities period or that rest period. Fohat is very much so still active. Okay, so before we can evolve to these higher levels of consciousness, there must be a period of rest, because everything in this manifested universe goes through its cycles according to the principle of rhythm. So the worlds are built from the latent energy from the last or the older world. Okay, the imperishable lay centers are the areas that the planet dissolved back into and out of at each start of an activity period or a rest period. Okay, so when we're trying to reach higher levels of consciousness and it collapses back into itself, it collapses into this lay center, or where the 0 point energy is. But at the start of the next manavantaric dawn, Fohat is going to emanate out a ray and activate this same old world, and it's going to be created new. But it's out of the same material. So I want to read us a little excerpt from this 4th section, okay? So part B says, bear in mind that Fohat, the constructive force of cosmic electricity, is said metaphorically to have sprung like Rundra from Brahma, from the brain of the father and the bosom of the mother, and then to have metamorphosized himself into a male and a female, polarity into positive and negative electricity. He has 7 sons who are his brothers, and Fohat is forced to be born time after time whenever any 2 of his son brothers indulge in too close contact, whether an embrace or a fight. To avoid this, he bonds together and unites those of unlike nature and separates those of similar temperaments. This, of course, relates, as any one can see, to electricity generated by friction and to the law involving attraction between 2 objects of unlike, and repulsion between 2 of like polarity. The 7 son brothers, however, represent and personify the 7 forms of cosmic magnetism, called in practical occultism the 7 radicals, whose cooperative and active progeny are, among other energies, electricity, magnetism, sound, light, heat, cohesion. Occult science defies all these as supersensuous effects in their hidden behavior and as an object phenomenon in the world of senses, meaning it's in the physical plane. The former requiring abnormal faculties to perceive them. The latter are ordinary physical senses. They all pertain to and are the emanations of still more supersensuous spiritual qualities, not personated by, but belonging to real and conscious causes. To attempt a description of such entities would be worse than useless. The reader must bear in mind that according to our teachings, which regard this phenomenal universe as a great illusion, the nearer a body is to the unknown substance, the more it approaches reality, as being removed the further from the world of Maya. Therefore, though the molecular constitution of their bodies is not deducible from their manifestation on this plane of consciousness, they nevertheless, from the standpoint of the adept occultist, possess a distinctive objective, if not material structure in the relativity noumenal, as opposed to the phenomenal universe. Men of science may term them force or forces generated by matter or modes of its motion. If they will, occultism sees in effects elemental forces, and in the direct causes producing them, intelligent divine workmen. The intimate connection of these elementals, guided by the unerring hand of the ruler, their correlation, we might call it, with the elements of pure matter results in our terrestrial phenomena such as light, heat, magnetism, etc. Of course, we shall never agree with the American substantialist who call everything force and energy, whether it's light, whether it's heat, whether it's electricity or cohesion. They also call it an entity, for this would be equivalent to calling the noise produced by the rolling wheel of a vehicle an entity, thus confusing and identifying that noise with the driver outside, and then guiding master's intelligence within the vehicle. But we certainly give that name to the driver and to these guiding intelligence, the ruling Dayan Kohans as shown, the elementals, the nature forces, are the acting, though invisible, or rather imperceptible, secondary causes, and in themselves the effects of primary causes behind the veil of all terrestrial phenomenon. Electricity, light, heat, etc. have been aptly termed the ghost or shadow of matter in motion. Supersensuous states of matter whose effects only we are able to cognize. To expand then the simile given above, the sensation of light is like the sound of the rolling wheel, a purely phenomenal effect, having no existence outside of the observer. The proximate exciting cause of sensation is comparable to the driver, a supersensuous state of matter in motion, a nature force or elemental. But behind even this stands, just as the owner of the carriage directs the driver from within, the higher and noumenal causes, the intelligences from whose essence radiates these states of mother, generating the countless milliards of elemental or psychic natural spirits, just as every drop of water generates its physical infinitesimal infusoria. It is Fohat who guides the transfers of the principles from one planet to the other, from one star to another child star. When a planet dies, its informing principles are transferred to a Leia or sleeping center with potential but latent energy in it, which is thus awakened into life and begins to form itself into a new sidereal body. So this is explaining that Fohat is an androgynous energy and contains both the mother and the father. It's positive and negative electricity, or what we consider to be polarity. So Fohat is activated every time that two energies become too close together because friction is caused and higher states of consciousness are about to be reached. Then it unifies the energies that are alike and separates them from the ones that aren't. So it is a unifying force, which we know because we know that soul is also Fohat in the physical when it comes to man, and that is the unifying or electrifying force that is in every single atom, okay? So the more that the energy approaches reality or moves away from this illusion, friction starts to happen, and this may have side effects often called the seven radicals. This is where they get like the fight in heaven kind of comes from. But the seven radicals are electricity, magnetism, sound, light, heat, cohesion. One thing I noticed when I started to raise my vibration, aka becoming more electric, is that I started to be shocked by metal more often. Every time I would touch my car door, sometimes when I would be touching people, sometimes when I would touch my seatbelt. It started to happen so frequently, right? And I would also randomly start sweating in my sleep and I would become so freaking hot, okay? So I started to get compliments as well about my skin glowing because I was becoming more light. These are direct results of you getting closer to the real reality or the next level of consciousness. So Fohat eventually comes in and balances this energy out. Science calls these side effects entities, but we just need to understand that everything in the phenomenal universe is an effect in this terrestrial world, and it's caused by these Daihan Kohans or these celestial beings who are governing and watching over this planet. Nothing is a coincidence. So calling these entities are like calling the noise made from starting your car the car itself instead of a side effect of the car igniting. Okay, so Fohat guides and transfers the elements from one planet to another. And when a planet dies, it guides the energy towards this 0 point energy to kind of prepare it for the next activity center whenever that happens. Now, in this stanza, Helena stops and explains the facts and explanations of the 7 sacred globes and the lunar monads. This is something you can read on your own if you want to. It's quite long, but provides deeper understanding on how the planetary system is formed. This section is separate from the stanzas itself, though. But it is very interesting because it explains the septenary chain that everything has to go through. Now, part 5 says, at the 4th round or revolution of life and being around the 7 smaller wheels, the sons are told to create their images. 1/3 refuses, 2/3 obey. So this part of the stanza is talking about the 4th round, which is where humanity was formed. The round is the same as a root race, okay? So the first round has to do with the elementals and minerals. The second round was plant life and animal life. The third round, there were celestial beings here, or just beings in general, but it wasn't until the 4th round that humanity was created. And during this time, the celestial beings were advised to create us in their likeness, but some refused, which we already talked about, which they garnered karma from, while others obliged. So when it says the 7 wheels, they're talking about these planetary chains again. And in this same section, it goes on to say the curse is pronounced. They will be born in the 4th race, suffer and cause suffering. This is the first war. Okay. So basically what this section is telling us is talking about the universal tradition that in order to become a self-conscious spirit, the spirit must fall into generation, where it goes through every cycle of being, okay, the 7 densities of consciousness. The curse is just the potential for bad things to happen, which are the effects of a karmic cause that someone sets into motion when they defy the laws of the universe, which causes pain and suffering. So this is just what the Bible calls the fall of the angels, this process of generation that the spirit must go through while existing as 2 parts, because you're both spirit and your matter. So when you incarnate, you're moving from matter back up into spirit. And on this journey, if you're not aware of the universal laws, you start to collect karma that can cause pain and suffering, but could also keep you locked into reincarnating into this plane, okay? Also, in this plane, you are spirit as well, which gives you free will to make any decisions you want, but you have to compensate for those decisions that go against nature or infringe upon somebody else's free will. So the war in heaven where Satan was cast out is speaking about us falling in consciousness from pure spirit into matter, but still maintaining the essence of spirit within us. So we never really die, right? We're still built in the likeness of God. We just keep reincarnating until we compensate for all the karma and ascend back towards spirit. It's a fight between spirit and matter. So long story short, we are the fallen angels, right? Because we're still made in the essence of angelic beings. We still have a celestial side to us that is spirit. We are still spirit in essence, right? Once we lose this body, we still are spirit. We go back into being spirit, regardless of if we pass the fucking test or we don't, right? So we still have this spiritual essence. So we're like gods living in this lower energy. Unfortunately, we've lowered our vibration to the very, very lowest it can get in order for us to take this journey back to self-consciousness, where we can make the choices that we want to make freely without any interference, and we get to really choose who we want to be. And once we pass that test, we journey back into this path of spirit where we become celestial beings, where we journey back towards becoming one or all with this God energy. Now, part 6 says the older wheels rotating downwards and upwards, the mother's spawn filled the whole cosmos. There were battles fought between the creators and the destroyers, and the battles fought for space, the seed appearing and reappearing continuously. Now, this part is just explaining the process that happens when the old world has reached the period of rest, because it has reached this higher consciousness. So the levels of consciousness for this universe is similar to that of men. We are at the very bottom and we can't see the higher 3 planes, but the goal is for us to reach the higher 3 levels of consciousness in our personal evolution so that we can align with the higher 3 levels of consciousness in the cosmos. And when the older planets go back into this place of rest, they basically deteriorate and disappear. Then they reappear in a new and improved state at the start of the next manavantaric dawn, okay? So the central sun causes Fohat to collect the primordial residue or dust from the old worlds and form them into balls. And then the Fohat hits them, causing them to move towards each other and aggregate. So there's no really rhyme or rhythm as to where these balls go into space. Essentially, they are passing and hitting anything in its path until it slows down and becomes similar to like a comet wandering around space. Then the older bodies start to attract the younger ones to it, and they may either devour the younger ones, or whatever parts of it that survive actually become this new world or these new worlds. Okay, so this is kind of where Darwin got the survival of the fittest idea, which really originated from ancient antiquity. But using the Hermetic principle, as above, so below, he came up with survival of the fittest, because that's really what's going on in the planetary chain when the start of a new manavantaric dawn comes around. This is also where the great wars in heaven comes from. In the Puranas, they call the War of the Titans. In Hesiod and other classical writers, the struggle also is in Egyptian legends is between Osiris and Typhon. And even those in Scandinavian legends, they all refer to this process of planets being reawoken during this manavantaric dawn and flying through the fucking universe, hitting everything, devouring other planets until they stop and become the new worlds. So the idea is that Fohat is the only thing that doesn't rest. In this rest period, it is gathering the materials into balls using the primordial matter of the old worlds. Then at the start of the activity period, Fohat impels each ball, scattering them across space. They first become comets, right? And this is like the idea of the dragon with the fiery tail, because if you think about a comet going through space, it's literally on fire and it's creating a tail, right? Then they become suns when they slow down and they lose their tail. So they're kind of like in one spot, which causes them to cool down and to become inhabitable planets again, okay? So they end up attracting other celestial bodies and being repelled by others until they find a steady home rotating in the gravitational pull of another body, if not completely pulled into it and destroyed. Hence the war in heaven, hence the war between the creators and the destroyers, okay? So next I'm going to read you a section that I thought was really, really interesting, because it talks about the North Pole and the South Pole, and it also talks about the Aurora Borealis, which is supposed to be an emanation from the black sun, but they have an interesting take on this, so I just wanted you guys to listen to this part. So it says, the adobes of Fohat are many. It is said, he places his 4 fiery electropositive suns in the 4 circles. These circles are the equator and the ecliptic, and the 2 parallels of declination, or the tropics, to preside over the climates of which are placed the 4 mystic entities. Then again, other 7 suns are commissioned to preside over the 7 hot and the 7 cold lokas, the hells of the Orthodox Brahmin. At the 2 ends of the egg of matter are Earth and its poles. The 7 lokas are also called the rings. Elsewhere in the circles, the ancients made the polar circles 7 instead of 2, as Europeans do. For Mount Muro, which is the North Pole, it is said to have 7 gold or 7 silver steps leading into it. The strange statement made in one of the stanzas, the song of Fohat and his sons were radiant as the noontide sun and the moon combined, and that the 4 suns on the middle 4 circles saw their father's song and heard his solar selenic radiance, is explained in the commentary in these words. The agitation of the Fohatic forces at the 2 cold ends, the North and the South Pole of the Earth, which results in the multicolored radiance at night, have in them several of the properties of akasa or aether colors and sounds as well. Sound is the characteristic of akasa or aether, so it generates air, and the property of which is touch, which by friction becomes productive of color and light. Perhaps the above will be regarded as archaic nonsense, but it will be better comprehended if the reader remembers the Aurora Borealis and the Australis, both of which take place at the very center of terrestrial electric and magnetic forces, right? Because they say that the Aurora Borealis is literally at the center of this plane of inertia. Both of these which take place at the very center of the terrestrial electric and magnetic forces. The 2 poles are said to be the storehouses, the receptacles, and the liberators at the same time of cosmic and terrestrial vitality, which is electricity, from the surplus of which the earth had it not been these two natural safety valves, would have been rent to pieces long ago. At the same time, it is now a theory that has lately become an axiom that the phenomenon of polar lights is accompanied by and productive of strong sounds like whistles, hissing, and cracking. Right? So I thought this was really interesting because if we're talking about aether, we're talking about the feminine principle. If the aurora borealis is, this light spectrum, because it really is light, it's sound, it's aether energy, and it's supposed to be emanating from the black sun, then that means that the black sun, when they say that the black sun is the spiritual sun, meaning the feminine sun, that makes complete fucking sense to me. Now, part 7, which is the last part of this, says, make thy calculations, O Lanu, if thou wouldest learn the correct age of thy small wheel or chain. Its fourth spoke is our mother earth. Reach the fourth fruit of the fourth path of knowledge that leads to nirvana, and thou shalt comprehend, for thou shalt see. So this last part is asking us to calculate the age of earth, since it is the fourth fruit, but it's basically saying that some of the teachers of occult knowledge actually do know what the age of earth is, but they just won't tell us. So there's really no way of us to know or guesstimate this. But the takeaway from this is that the world formation is that the curds, or this world stuff, right, this latent energy, becomes wanderers, which are comets, and these become stars, and then the stars our sun, and then our planets, period, point blank. Now, the next part of this last one just explains that there is a nameless deity called the Initiator, who from which in subsequent ages all the great historically known sages and hierophants, such as the Rishi Kapilas, the Hermes, Enoch, and Orpheus, gained their knowledge, who made the great sacrifice to live in solitude separate from mankind. He sits at the threshold of light, or the fountain of primeval wisdom, looking into the darkness but never crossing, because he holds all the superior knowledge needed when we pass through the veil of illusion. So only a few of us may actually profit from his sacrifice, because it requires you to be really initiated for him to come into your awareness, but he is there. And this is where we receive all of our knowledge on our arts and on science, along with our spiritual knowledge as well. And as I read further, it seems as if this is a group of beings from the third root race that helped to lay the foundation of the ancient civilizations. Okay, so from him came the initiates and the yogas and the Buddhas, who keep this knowledge sacred because they understand that mankind is not ready, as most of us are still in our animal instincts. But it goes on to explain that we are miracles because there are no other beings that possess our consciousness, and that when we meditate, we are able to turn our thoughts into scientific facts. So we as mankind in this fourth root race, referred to as the Aryans, we are the holiest because we have a direct connection to the universe and spirit, which lives inside of us. And that's what makes us different. So boom, that's the end of stanza 6. Now, stanza 6 basically tells us that every single planet in our planetary chain is connected in some way or form, and each planet affects the other. And the higher planets, or the planets that are further away from us, are at a higher level of consciousness than we are. Then it goes on to explain how these planets came about, right? They were at a lower level, right? They're going through an evolutionary process that's very similar to that of man, right? But there comes a period of rest that everything in the universe has to go through, right? So when it comes to this new density of consciousness, it must collapse into itself into these lay centers. And that is where latent energy is still there. During this period of rest, Foha is basically collecting primordial matter from these older worlds and shaping them into balls. And then at the start of the next manavantaric 9, or this period of activity, it emanates a light that impels these balls and sends them shooting through the universe like a dragon with a fiery tail behind them, hitting and devouring other planets until it comes to a resting period where it cools down and becomes inhabitable. And this is all done by the feminine principle, because the feminine principle is sound and aether. Now, next week, we're going to go over the last stanza, which is stanza 7. The resources for this episode are the same. It's The Secret Doctrine by Helena Blavatsky, Theosophy Wiki, and The Secret Book of Dizon. If you're not following me again on YouTube, please do so, because I'm starting this new series that's going to really help us to connect the dots between religion, philosophy, theosophy, and so much more. The link is in my bio, or you can just put in the username, which is Big Taj with 2 J's. I love y'all deep, and I'll see y'all next week.